Members, are we ready? Okay, thank you.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for being here this morning and considering SB 1457. First, I'd like to start by painting a clear picture in our minds what this bill does. We are a fortunate nation to have a high-quality, free public education system, and we're also fortunate enough to have high-access, quality private schools, too, that allow parents to place their children in educational or religious environments of their choosing. I'm sure some here today even attended private schools at some point in your lives. But unfortunately, like many other privileges, there's some private schools are not available or an option for everyone. And so here's my goal today, and that is to open a door to those students who do not have the means to attend public school, thus allowing the parents the choice to expose their children to the worldview of their choosing. Now, current law, which I also have a copy of this, does say that it permits students to miss a small amount of school to participate in religious studies, or the concept which I'm introducing here today is known as release time. Unfortunately, the way that it's allowed in current law restricts the student's ability to schedule it into their daily routine and does not recognize the hard work they put into these studies. So that this is the rationale for the bill, to make an existing practice work better for our students in all communities, from the very highest to those underprivileged communities too. So as we get into the specifics, I'd like to ask you to keep in mind that this is a permissive nature of our education code. So we are not considering statutory authority here today. Our school boards, as you know, do have autonomy to pass the policies they desire within the limits of our education code and federal law. The background requests from this committee ask members to justify the needs for their bills, stating that intervention by the state should be reserved for the most severe situations that cannot be resolved locally. So if the role of the state is to intervene only when necessary, then the goal of this bill is to provide necessary guidance for the school districts that want to pass these policies. Therefore, so this is that guidance on this bill, which emulates laws that have been enacted in other states, laws that were shaped and carefully considered by the high courts and other legislatures. This bill will ensure school districts know their boundaries that they need to follow. They do not need our permission to allow release time, but if a school board is not comfortable with passing this policy, it's simple, they just don't have to. And so what we do here today is help give proper guidance. That's why SB 1457, that's what it provides. Now this bill's been carefully crafted. Each provision comes from cautious consideration in numerous court decisions and existing laws and practice in other states, as well as much good input from many here on the panel. I appreciate Senator Liu's input. Dr. Pan, thank you. Senator Mendoza, thank you very much. And Senator Motti, thank you for the input. We took everything you said, we took to heart to try to make this bill palatable and something that you guys would approve of. Now, as you know from the committee analysis, students are already excused from school to participate in religious exercises and receive religious or moral instruction. This became law after release time was considered by the Supreme Court in Zorig versus Clausen. In that case, release time held up against all tests examining the entanglement of the church and state as long as certain conditions were met. Those conditions are outlined in our current law. However, California added a provision not outlined by the court that no other state has, which limits participation in release time to only 4 days a month. Now, this limitation causes challenges when students are trying to fit release time into their schedule. So first, SB 1475 will remove this time restriction for certain programs to enable a more systematic approach to release time. That will in turn allow districts to consider programs for credit. Therefore, SB 1457 will also provide school districts with proper guidelines to creating a workable policy. Now, the committee analysis incorrectly asserts that the bill authorizes but does not require consideration of these requirements. Let me just clarify that. The bill states that a school district may adopt that policy allowing credit, and if it does, that policy shall include the requirement outlined. And if you look on page 3 of your bill, lines number 20 through 27, you'll see where those gives us the very specifics to address that question. So to be clear, while this bill is permissive in school boards, participation is very prescriptive to what that participation shall entail. In summary, a school board may adopt a policy authorizing a pupil to earn up to 2 elective credits only if he or she considers the number of hours of instruction, a review of the course syllabus, methods of assessment, and the qualifications of the instructor in determining whether to authorize course credit. In addition, this policy requires, and if you want to refer to page 4 of the bill, lines number 1 through 33 gives the actual specifics, but I'll cut them short here. But written permission from the parent is one safeguard. The instruction is to take place off the public school campus, and no public school personnel is to be involved. Maintenance of attendance records, transportation, including transportation for students with disabilities will be provided, and also whoever does this must assume liability for that student. The student cannot miss any core curriculum, and the student must make up any missed schoolwork. Next, I would also like to take a moment and thank Dr. Pan for offering a suggestion that I will be adding to this bill, and that is to include language requiring the school district to consider the learning objective of the course in their decision to award credit. And I think that is an important consideration to add, and thank you for that, Dr. Pan. Now I'd like to address some questions that came up in conversation from my different Senate colleagues. And first, one was, should students be permitted to receive credit towards their public school education for private religious-based courses? The answer is they already are. As I mentioned a moment ago, students already granted elective credit for comparable classes taken at private schools if they transfer into a public school. Does that make sense? Oh, thank you. Offering credit for release time is no different. Also, I want to add, this comparison was also considered by the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals in Moss versus Spartanburg County School District and by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Lanner versus Wimmer. And both cases held that the offering elective credit for the release time simply accommodates an individual's right to freely practice their religion and therefore does not create an entanglement between church and state. So for our educational system to be fair, and we all want fairness, and to be neutral, parents should not be restricted in the right to provide their children with an education of their choosing. Ultimately, if a student can take a class in golfing or home ec or whatever, even an internship off campus, in all fairness, we should include release time. One of the biggest concerns, which thank you for bringing this to my attention, Senator Lieu, seems to be effective, and Senator Monti, of average daily attendance. So I want to address that. In keeping with the spirit of separation of church and state, if schools are accommodating a student's constitutional rights, we should not penalize them for it. So this bill specifically does not affect ADA. As I mentioned before, the goal of removing the time limitation outlined in current law for programs that are accepted for students is to allow the student to work release time into their schedule. This will enable a student to be off campus for a short amount of time and will therefore be in attendance every single day. By removing the existing limitation, we are actually doing less to affect the school's ADA. I do understand this is an issue of concern, but I am confident we can come to an agreement today. But moving forward, as I summarize my comments, please keep in mind these programs are already permitted by state law and exist in practice. They exist in each of our districts. They have been in the United States for well over 100 years, and they are a result of many years of development which have ultimately led us to a well thought out system. This bill simply creates a better method of accommodating students' schedule. Simply put, SB 1457 will enable students to supplement their public education with a little bit of private instruction without violating the First Amendment. And just as a personal comment and a passion. This program has been really great in encouraging kids and motivating them to high and noble thinking. And it even, when you think about the virtues in life, they're propelled, many of them, to even study harder in school. It's a hopeful program, which I think many of our students need today, and what can be a hopeless world sometimes. So with that said, I want to thank you for listening. But first, I have a good friend of mine who I met a couple of years ago, Mrs. Gail Blake Smith. Upon retirement, Gail was called to fulfill her passion, create a nonprofit, faith-based volunteer organization that works with children in public education. This is in her DNA. It's who she is. And this is why I'm so passionate about this bill, because her DNA and her goal is to just make our children in the state of California better. Today, as the founder and executor of the Chino Release Time Education Program, she oversees a staff of 42 to meet with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders from 22 different elementary schools. She's going to speak now on the practical workings of this program located in California and the benefits she sees our students in California receive on this. So if you'd like to take it, thank you.
Senator Morale. Good morning, Chairperson Lou. Thank you for having us here today and giving us the opportunity to share with you some compelling reasons for ruling favorably on our bill today. I'm not sure how familiar you are with release time. It's the best kept secret in America, even though it's been around, started by a school superintendent 101 years ago. Today, throughout the United States, there are 32 states that actually have incorporated release time, and students in public education, K through 12, are attending it weekly. I'm thinking we have about 330,000 students total enrolled today in release time in America. As long as the students, as was just mentioned, are taught off property to comply with the Establishment Clause, as long as they have written parent permission, and as long as it's only 1 hour 4 times a month, then we are not illegal. We try to stay within all the boundaries of the law, and of course we receive no money from public taxpayers. I'd like to share just a couple of compelling reasons why it is so important that youth have the opportunity to study the faith of their choice. The Bible is most likely the most influential and published book in the history of humanity. One cannot claim that American students are truly educated unless they have a working knowledge of the Bible. Moreover, the United States Supreme Court has stated that one's education is not complete without a study of comparative religion or the history of religion and the relationship in the advancement of civilization. In case you're wondering if there's any academic value to a student who attends release time, I'm glad you asked, because absolutely there is. Dr. James, who will be willing to answer any of your questions, has done numerous studies, meta-analysis studies, and he has concluded that students that have a good working knowledge of the Bible through release time have a 1.0 greater GPA on a 4.0 scale than their counterparts who have little or no Bible knowledge. Dr. James has also concluded that students with the highest test scores and GPAs due to a good knowledge of the Bible have the best school behavior and don't risk dropouts. My last compelling reason that we ask you to pass this legislation goes from my heart to yours. According to the Center of Disease Control, the third cause of death among teens 17 to 24 young people in California is suicide. And I'm sure you are aware of that factor. But what just shocked me was when I recently read, since 2009, 10 high school youth in Santa Clara have committed suicide. And I understand that many of these students were good students, 4.0, 3.5 GPAs. This is such a conundrum for the parents, for the authorities, for the school officials, that they've invited the CDC to actually come in and do a mental study to find out why kids are killing themselves. But it's not just in Santa Clara, it's epidemic throughout California and throughout our nation. We know that there are various reasons why young people feel anguish and despair that they no longer want to deal with. Perhaps what really lies behind all of this is a lack of hope, a lack of vision. One of the greatest prophets that ever wrote in the book of Proverbs was Solomon, and he said that people without a vision will perish. Now, we know we cannot reach every student. That's not our goal. But every life is important, and we have reverence for every life. And if we can just reach a few through taking a Bible class, through release time, or studying another religion, then we know that they'll find faith and hope. I did it. So many other students have done it. And we want them not to just be the best student in a classroom, but the best student possible as they graduate and they go into society. So we're asking you to please consider passing this bill. We want to give hope and vision and help our students to be good scholars and the best citizens they can be as they go out into the world. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Others in support of the bill?
Yeah, I'd like to introduce next, and thank you, Gail, for that. That's why it's hard for me to say no to her. She's so good. Mr. Ken Breivik. Ken, would you like to start?
I'm Ken Breivik, and Senator Morrell asked me to be out here. I'm actually from the great state of South Carolina, so if you hear a slight southern accent, I apologize in advance. But we were one of the first states to actually pass a similar bill to this bill, and the senator asked me if I would just make a few comments about it and our experience with it. We looked at this bill because we have in a number of our school districts very wide balances between the rich and the poor in our communities. We have some very poor communities and some very rich communities right next to each other. And there were a number, they were seeing a growing trend in some of the more affluent communities wanting their kids to go to private school or to do homeschooling because of the religious instruction nature. So the question that was brought to me through release time, was there any way to look at doing this at the high school level? And the sole issue that we ran across was the issue of credit. Because as you know, I have a high schooler in public school, and the credit is really how we mark time now. It used to be that credit 100 years ago was just awarded in a few select areas. Now, even if you take gymnastics or whatever, you have to have a credit associated with it. So this was the issue that we focused on, and we in 2006 passed the release time credit bill in our state in South Carolina. We actually serve all of the age groups from elementary all the way through high school now that we have the credit, and this allowed for people that could not afford to send their kids to private school or could not afford to do homeschooling, maybe it was a one-parent family, to have an opportunity for religious instruction. Because really without it, what we're saying is the rights of the poor and working class are not as important in their religious freedoms. And so this is what we tried to fix through the Release Time Credit Act. I'm the executive director of school ministries. We're probably the largest group of release time association, including having members here in California, but we also serve in 9 different states. And Ohio also has passed a similar bill to what you all are considering at this point. And the program runs very well. I come from a family of academics. Actually, one of the last times I was here, my mother was over the library system at San Jose State University and launched the Martin Luther King Library that some of you all may know. So it's great to be here, and it's great for you to consider this bill, but I do ask you to consider the religious liberty of all of your students in the state, not just being able to consider the more affluent ones, but also the ones that can't afford it. This bill will do 2 things for you. First of all, it will allow you for parents to have that religious liberty aspect regardless of their economic situation. And second of all, a lot of people use the phrase that I'm actually in support of separation of church and state, but they don't think about what that means. That means that we should see diversity in what we have. If we had a school district, I'll pick on myself, that was full of just white males as teachers and superintendents, we would say that it's probably not a place of openness, but a place of discrimination. If the only thing we can see in the public schools is secular humanism, the courts have ruled that that's not appropriate. Release time gives you a way to do this and do this in a way that's constitutionally legal. And as long as, I call them the big three, as long as the big three are considered, and that is it's off-site, does not use governmental funds or personnel, and there's written consent of the parents, this has continuously, for over 7 years, been upheld by the courts as legal. So I ask you to consider well what you're doing for your constituencies and ask you to pass this bill out. And later on, I'll take any questions you all have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My next and final witness is Dr. William Janes. He has his master's degree from Harvard University, a PhD from the University of Chicago. He currently is a professor at Cal State Long Beach and has written a number of papers for the White House, both under the Bush administration and the Obama administration. And he's just completed an extensive research on the benefits of programs like this. Dr. Janes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Morell, and thank you very much, esteemed Senate committee. I'm very happy and honored to be with you today. Now, I was raised in the inner city of New York City. That is where I'm originally from. I was raised in a single-parent family and also an atheistic family. And please understand that perspective as I speak, because as I grew up, I was surrounded with mostly children of color being raised in the inner city. And even in my pre-academic years, I was very curious what enabled some of these youngsters to eventually overcome many of the challenges that they faced in life, and why did others fail to reach those levels of accomplishment? And even though I was an atheist, I couldn't deny it, that really the primary factor was whether they were people of faith. And it really hit me as an atheist. And then when I became an academic, I quickly realized that Gallup polls year after year after year show that among our citizenry in the United States, that African Americans and Latinos are by far the most religious. That is a source of strength in their life, and it's a very important one. And Bill Clinton made a very important speech back in 1995 in Vienna, Virginia. And what he said in 1995 is that our society really has misinterpreted many of the decisions by the Supreme Court to essentially say that public schools are religious-free zones, when in reality they are not religious-free zones, that the freedom of religion abides in all aspects of society. And the reality, again, is African Americans and Latinos, students derive great strength from their faith. Doesn't matter if any of us are a person of faith. Doesn't matter if I was an atheist. It was undeniable. They derived great strength from this. And to deny them access to that can actually be a case of institutional racism without us even realizing it, especially because my data analysis, both in meta-analyses and also using the NELS nationwide data set, indicates that when you compare African Americans and Latinos of faith, the achievement gap is actually cut in half. And I think that's very important to realize. They derive a sense of purpose and strength. And I think we might ask, why is there an achievement gap? Why does there exist a gap between overall white achievement and the achievement of African Americans and Latinos? And of course, one of the reasons that is most commonly given is that our society has denied them from many of the intellectual resources that they need in order to understand history and literature. And first and foremost among those is the Bible itself, which is likely the most influential book in the history of humanity. It is the most published book in the history of humanity. And in order to understand history, world history, American history, many of the great works of literature, it is vital that people have at least a working knowledge of the Bible. Shakespeare alone cites the Bible 1,300 times. Many of the great writers, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Dickens, I could go on down the line, Steinbeck, assume that the reader will have a working knowledge of the Bible. We cannot understand the women's suffrage movement. We cannot understand Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement unless we have a working knowledge of the Bible. And again, by denying African American and Latino children in particular, and again, this is my concern because this is why I've been invited to the White House to present meta-analyses on these issues. What we basically do is we handcuff African American and Latino students from many of the intellectual resources that they need to do well in school. African American lives matter. Latino lives matter. And again, it doesn't matter whether we're people of faith or derive strength from the Bible or other pieces of religious literature. They do. That is the reality. And if we're really serious about the achievement gap, we need to have compassion for these children. We need to have compassion for them. We need to not only be able to relate to them intellectually, but our hearts need to go out to them. And if we really believe that Black lives matter, if we really believe that Latino lives matter, let's not just say that we believe they matter. Let's take action and do what we can to give them the access that they need to many of these intellectual resources, first and foremost the Bible, so that they can do better in school and the achievement gap can be reduced. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Others in support of the bill? Is there any opposition to the bill? Will you please make some room for the people to come forward here at the desk? Yes, just, no. You have to get up and be replaced. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Ron Rapp, speaking on behalf of the California Federation of Teachers and speaking in opposition to this bill. We believe that this bill, if enacted, would blur the lines between church and state. Students who attend public schools funded through public dollars should not be receiving religious instruction at non-public private schools during the course of the regular school day. CFT believes that religious instruction can and should occur outside of the school day and on weekends. And it's for these reasons that we oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and members, Isabel Garcia with the California Teachers Association. We are recommending and oppose on this bill at our State Council of Education, but I first want to commend the author and his tremendous staff for answering lots of questions we had about the bill, and also respect the distinguished co-authors of the bill that are on this panel, and of course the witnesses that have testified. Notwithstanding the taxpayer entanglement of money for sectarian instruction during a compulsory school attendance day for our students that was articulated, our primary concern is illustrated in the bill analysis under elective credit on page 5, and it lists 4 concerns. And on a practical level, for whether it's the school counselor or the teacher, who is going to be charged with when a student is released for sectarian instruction that may or may not be based on academic content standards or may not be taught by a certificated teacher, who is going to decide what is going to be given graduation credit, because it can't be the counselor or the teacher, because then by default, every course, whether it's in Muslim or Hindu or anything, would have to get graduation requirement, because then you could invite undue litigation. But more so, the school employees are, they're neutral. And to be placed in a position of having to determine graduation credit for an elective course, although it's not a core course, it's still going to be a course for graduation requirements. And frankly, as you all know, the students in California have a demanding instructional day, not only for the district graduation requirements, but for the state college and career academic standards. So it is a very changed world. But I will say, with respect to all of the points that were made by the supporters of this bill, yes, I went to parochial schools and public schools, and I was one of 4 Garcia girls in Flint, Michigan, where the community said, we were low income, and they said, we value you and we will help subsidize your private religious education. And yes, it had tremendous value for me. And yes, when I got to college, I was able to take Bible as literature, and I was able to bring all my public and private education to that. And so I think with the children in our communities and all of the faith-based groups reaching out to care for all of our children, I think there is appropriate policy in that. But for this bill, we just are concerned about the intrusion and entanglement of the school employees and the practitioners, and how would you do that without a default that everybody who asks for credit for sectarian instruction would have to receive it. So for those reasons, again, with all due respect to the author and the supporters of the bill, we're not supporting the bill.
Thank you.
Good morning, Sue Vang on behalf of State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torkson. The superintendent does not have a position on this bill. We are still reviewing it. However, we do have concerns regarding the separation between the church and state. Thank you.
Thank you. Others opposed to the bill? Is there somebody standing? I can't see. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Morrell. There were people behind you, I think. Are you supporting or?
I'm in support.
You're in.
May I speak, or did I miss?
Oh, we already did that, but okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Are you all in support? Yes. All right. Go ahead.
My name is Brother Gary, also known as Gospel Gary Hayden of the Word of God Preservation Society of Northern California. I want to take what I wanted to say very briefly and throw it in the garbage. When Mrs. Blakeship spoke, I'd like to just testify that I did not grow up in a religious family. I never went to church. I didn't know anything about the Bible. And at the age of 11, my grandfather took his own life. My dad turned to liquor. My mom went into a shell, and I suffered depression for many years. It wasn't until late in middle age that I came to read the Bible. And maybe a lot of you, or some of you may be thinking of, conjures up images of when you're going across the street to the Chicory to get a pastrami sandwich, and there's that street preacher thumping his King James Bible and preaching sin, death, hell, and judgment. I'm not speaking about that. But I would offer to you that the Psalms provide comfort that I didn't know about. The Proverbs provide wisdom that I wasn't aware of. And we're not talking about forwarding religion. We're talking about the Bible as a source of peace and of comfort and of wisdom. And oh, how I wish that I could go back and have received that. Thank you.
Madam Chairman and fellow Californians, my name is Wiley Drake. I'm chairman of the Congressional Prayer Conference of Washington, D.C., and I bring you greetings from our nation's capital. I'm stationed here in California, and I'm here to do 2 things today. Number 1, to give you an organizational endorsement of this bill. We have very carefully and succinctly investigated this bill, and we are 100% behind it and for it. The Congressional Prayer Conference of Washington, D.C. endorses this bill for the obvious reasons that have already been very articulately presented in reference to the fact of a child having hope and a good education. We're very proud of our education in California, and we are neglectful in this area, and we need to increase that. We need to get back to be the best. And so the Congressional Prayer Conference of Washington, D.C., myself as chairman, Wiley Drake, my co-chairman, Dr. Clyde Rivers, who is also the ambassador at large from the African country of Burundi. We both endorse this as an organization. And I personally, Wiley Drake, candidate for president of the United States on the California ballot, I personally endorse this bill and ask you to please pass it.
Thank you.
Kristen Morrow with the California Catholic Conference, and we support this bill.
Thank you.
Hi, Jonathan Keller with California Family Alliance and California Family Council, very strongly supportive of Senator Morell's bill.